Hey everybody, today we're going to be discussing the power of a name, Terah. Terah is also in the line of Shem. He was born in 1878 AC after creation. His name in Hebrew means wild goat, wanderer, loiterer, to breathe, scent, blow, fury. In 1878, this was when Palestine and the first Zionist colony was formed. It is also when The Sunday Move by John Jasper was written. And within this time period, you will find Daniel 11:20 and the British Mandate. And let us discuss. So, the Ottoman Palestine in 1878 was home to a population of 440,850 people, and 88% were Muslim, including a small minority of Druze, D-R-U-Z-E, 9% Christian, and 3% Jews. Palestinian Jews were predominantly living in existing towns with religious significance such as Tiberias, Safed, Hebron, and Jerusalem, and had not been establishing new Jewish settlements. So in addition to the main population, there were around 200 Samaritans living on the edge of Nablus, and also a small number of gypsies. Pasha 2002, page 2 is where this information is found. Passia. In 1878, 26 Jerusalem Jewish families purchased a piece of land 9 kilometers, 5.6 miles outside of Jaffa, which was part of the grazing land of the Arab village of Al-Abbasiyah. The Jewish site was named Petah Tikva, meaning the Gate of Hope. From the beginning of the Jewish rural community came into conflict with local Arab farmers. In 1882, the Jewish settlement of Rishon LeZion, meaning first to Zion, was established. The settlement was founded on land belonging to Arab villagers from Yun Kara. So, early colonial activity had lacked funding and organization, but this would soon change as Zionism gained wider support. European Jewish philanthropists such as Moses Montefiore and Edmund de Rothschild started to discreetly negotiate with Ottoman officials to bypass bureaucracy and purchase large areas of land to establish Jewish settlements. The aim was to try to establish a Jewish community which could be financially dependent on the land in order to develop, rather than merely being a small number of poverty-stricken religious Jews living from charity handouts. Now, as far as what we've read so far, I want you to think about this. This name is supposed to be a wild goat, a wanderer, a loiterer, to breathe, scent, blow, fury. Well, we're looking at everything that's been said and how it's talking about these people don't have a land of their own, so they're trying to purchase this land to no longer have to be a wanderer, I guess you could say. But let's continue reading to see if we can really firmly define what is going on here. So as Europe marched on to destroy the crumbling Ottoman Empire, the Palestinians, as with the rest of the Ottoman Arab world, feared an uncertain future, and Palestinian fellahin peasants faced increasing problems finding work as new immigrants wander dispossessed from them of their land and livelihoods. Some 11,000 Jewish immigrants were working on 47 plural plantations and cooperatives across the land, supervised and subsidized by the WZO. Zionists in Europe, mostly notable in Britain, were pushing for validation of their colonialist project in Palestine. So we're starting to see the wondering and the loitering and all this going on. But let's continue. Anti-Semitism under the Tsarist government. The worst and most infamous case was in the village of Sachkhere, Sachkhere, in 1878, when 9 Jews were accused of partaking in the ritual killing of a Christian child to use the blood to make matzah for Passover. So, think of this wild goat accused of partaking in a ritual killing. Think of Abraham, Isaac, a ritual killing where he was asked to sacrifice his son, his one and only son. But that could be stretching it, but let's continue. It says the highly publicized trial occurred in Kutaisi and was called the Kutaisi trial. The accused were found not guilty, but the blood libels continued. The Treaty of Berlin, 1878, provided for its termination since the establishment of the Principality of Bulgaria and Eastern Rumelia, in connection with which the Provisional Russian administration was abolished in May 1879. The main objectives of the temporary Russian administration was to establish peaceful life and preparation for a revival of the Bulgarian state. Under pressure from the British, Russia accepted the truce offered by the Ottoman Empire in January 31st, 1878, but continued to move towards Constantinople. The British sent a fleet of battleships to intimidate Russia from entering the city, and Russian forces stopped at San Stefano. Eventually, Russia entered into a settlement under the Treaty of San Stefano on March 3rd, by which the Ottoman Empire would recognize the independence of Romania, Serbia, Montenegro, and autonomy of Bulgaria. Alarmed by the extension of Russian power into the Balkans, the Great Powers later forced modifications of the treaty in the Congress of Berlin. So, in a way, it's talking about here that you're getting independence for these countries, and it's almost like you're breathing life into them, kind of. But it's also not saying that, because it goes on to say that the main change here was Bulgaria would be split according to earlier agreements among the great powers that precluded the creation of a large new Slavic state. The northern and eastern parts to become principalities as before, Bulgaria and eastern Rumelia, though with different governors, and the Macedonia region, originally part of Bulgaria under San Stefano, would return to direct Ottoman administration. At the Congress of Berlin, Bismarck said that he was fighting for peace in Europe. Fighting. Sounds like it could be partially fury, but let's continue. There's effects on Bulgaria's Muslim and Christian population. Turkish refugees fleeing from Tarnova towards Shumen. Moans of massacred Bulgarians at Stara Zagora. So here we hear refugees, loiterer, wanderer, wild goat, and massacre. Sounds like a fury was brought upon them, blown upon them, but let's not assume we've seen the word blow yet. Okay, sorry, I dropped something. Circassian horsemen during the Russo-Turkish War. The estimates of Muslim civilian casualties during the war are often estimated in the tens of thousands. Muslim civilian. The perpetrators of those massacres are also disputed, with American historian Justin McCarthy claiming that they were carried out by Russian soldiers, Cossacks, as well as Bulgarian volunteers and villagers. Though there were few civilian casualties in battle, while James J. Reed claims that Circassians were significantly responsible for the refugee flow, that there were civilian casualties from battle, and even that the Ottoman Empire was responsible for casualties among the Muslim population. So the Ottomans were taking their fury out on the Muslims, apparently. According to John Joseph, the Russian troops made frequent massacres of Muslim peasants. Wanderer, order, massacre, fury. Muslim refugees were attacked by Russian army. As a result, thousands of Muslim refugees died and their goods plundered. The correspondent of the Daily News describes as an eyewitness the burning of 4 or 5 Turkish villages by the Russian troops in response of the Turks firing at Russians from the villages instead of behind rocks or trees. So they're taking their fury out on these people because of that. Ridiculous. The number of Muslim refugees is estimated by R.J. Crampton as 130,000. But Richard C. Frucht estimates that only half, 700,000, of the pre-war Muslim population remained after the war. 216,000 had died and the rest immigrated. Douglas Arthur Howard estimates that half the 1.5 million Muslims, for the most part Turks, in pre-war Bulgaria had disappeared by 1879. 200,000 had died. The rest became permanently refugees, wanderers, loiterers, in Ottoman territories. However, it should be noted that according to one estimate, the total population of Bulgaria and its post-war borders was about 2.8 million in 1871, while according to official census, the total was 2.823 million in 1880 and 1881. All this because of that war. And then you got these first Palestinian and Zionist colony as well, with the refugees and everything. Then you have an internationalization of the Armenian question, immigration of Americans into Georgia during Russo-Turkish War, so more immigrants. In January 1878, Armenian Patriarch of Constantinople, Nerses II, Vazhapetian, approached the Russian leadership with a view of receiving assurances that the Russians would introduce provisions in the prospective peace treaty for self-administration of the Armenian provinces, though not as explicit. Article 16 of the Treaty of San Stefano read, as the evacuation of the Russian troops of the territory they occupy in America, and which is to be restored to Turkey, might give rise to conflicts and complications detrimental to the maintenance of good relations between the two countries, the Supreme Court engaged to carry into effect without further delay the improvements and reforms demanded by local requirements in the provinces inhabited by Armenians, and to guarantee their security from Kurds and Circassians. Great Britain, however, took objection to Russia holding on to so much Ottoman territory and forced it to enter into new negotiations with the convening of the Congress of Berlin in 1878. An Armenian delegation led by Prelate Miktik Crimean traveled to Berlin to present the case of Armenians, but much to its chagrin, was left out of the negotiations. Article 16 was modified and watered down, and all mention of the Russian forces remaining in the provinces was removed. In the final text of the Treaty of Berlin, it was transformed into Article 61, which read, the Supreme Court undertakes to carry out without further delay the improvements and reforms demanded by local requirements in the provinces inhabited by Armenians, and to guarantee their security against the Circassians and Kurds. It will periodically make known the steps taken to this effect to the powers who will superintend their application. And it turned out that the reforms were not forthcoming. Crimean returned to deliver a famous speech in Constantinople where he likened the peace conference to a big cauldron of liberty stew. Scent. Stew. Stew provides a big scent. And you can blow on it to calm the heat. Crimean said, could I have dipped my paper ladle in the cauldron, it would sog and remain there. Where guns talk and sabers shine, what significance do appeals and petitions have? With a lack of visible progress in the improvement of the plight of the Armenian community, the number of Armenians living in Europe and Russia in the 1880s and 1890s decided to form political parties and revolutionary societies, which had the aim of bringing better conditions for their compatriots in Anatolia and other parts of the Ottoman Empire. Now, The Sun Do Move by John Jasper. Let's see why this is important. John Jasper prominent slave preacher and founder of 6th Mount Zion Baptist Church in Richmond, gave this sermon in 1878. The dialect representations are part of the 1882 publication. Well, I guess I added that without adding the website, so give me a second to look that up. Copy. Paste. Okay. The text is found in Exodus chapter 15, verse 3. I think this is part of the sermon, The Sun Do Move. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. I will begin the argument by making a few broadcast remarks upon the original origin of the Jews. I shall start at Abram, the father of the Jews. After the flood, we read in the 10th chapter of Genesis how the world becomes settled with people and how they multiplied and where they went into the different parts of the earth. We find out that Abram was residing in Haran, where his relations were. They were idolaters. This is very difficult to read. They did not do a very good job removing spelling errors and whatnot. Transcription source: the celebrated theory of the sun's rotation around the earth as preached by Revelation John Jasper. That's what it's talking about. The sun rotating around the earth. The wanderer. The loiterer. The theory of the sun's rotation around the earth. That means before they realized that we rotated around the sun. That's interesting. Alright, so now we have made it to Daniel 11:20 and how it relates to the British Mandate. Daniel 11:20 reads, his successor will send out a tax collector to maintain the royal splendor. In a few years, however, he will be destroyed, yet not in anger or in battle. And I'm going to give you a different version of how that reads in the King James Version, just to show you that they pretty much say the same things. Alright, that's 11:20. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes, and the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. So you'll see that this verse is very distinctive of a relatively brief British involvement in the Middle East. The British and French succeeded the Ottomans, but only under the mandate system. The mandate system was created in 1919 as a temporary arrangement where the communities would receive mandatory advice and assistance until they were able to stand on their own. It was stipulated in the mandate that the wishes of the communities be a principal consideration. There were no set boundaries for anything, but by 1923 the French had accepted Syria and Lebanon, while the British took Iraq and Palestine. In time, they both left voluntarily, but they left behind a tax collector in the form of an oil company. which took a disproportionate amount of Iraqi profits. After several decades, the Iraqi government regained control of their oil revenues, yet not in battle, but in international courts. Honestly, I don't even think I need to read any more, because it pretty much answers the question right there, why the British Mandate is considered to be the raiser of taxes, and how it's not destroyed in battle or in anger. But let's go ahead and read some more so we can find out some more information as to how this leads up to our next discussion, because we're on Terah right now, but we're going to finally be getting to Abram, who was born in 1948 next, and not just him, but his brothers as well. So we're going to be talking about the oil and discuss division of land, which went pretty smooth except for one part. The British decided to split Palestine into two sections, separated by the Jordan River. They retained control of the western section, including Jerusalem, while the eastern section became Jordan. They picked two sons of Hashemite ruler from Mecca, Faisal and Abdullah, to become kings of Iraq and Jordan. The Hashemite ancestry went back to Muhammad's grandfather, so they had some degree of popularity, and Iraq became an official nation in 1932, followed by Syria and Lebanon in 1943, and Jordan in 1946. Of course, the one part of the system that did not go smoothly was the western 23% of Palestine. Circumstances occurred that were impossible to foresee when the British retained the small area. In the 1920s, the British started allowing an influx of Jews because the mandate stipulated that the wishes of the communities be a principal consideration. It seemed logical because there were Jewish communities in Palestine. Problems arose in the 1930s when Nazi persecution caused the influx to skyrocket. In 1939, just as persecution got worse, the British imposed a quota on annual immigration. With nowhere to go, the Jews either immigrated illegally or ended up in detention camps. And by the end of World War II in 1945, the population of Palestine was 31% Jewish, up from 11% in 1922. And despite criticism from the U.S. and others, the British maintained their ban on immigration after the war. Over 250,000 Jews were held in displaced persons camps in Europe, and others were diverted to Cyprus. Finally, the British gave up and turned the problem over to the newly formed United Nations. Hint, hint, they're part of the end times solutions. After months of debate, the United Nations approved a resolution to make two nations out of the small strip of land. One nation would be Jewish and the other Arab, with Jerusalem remaining under international administration. Most Jews accepted the proposal, but most Arabs were against it. Nevertheless, on May 14, 1948, Israel proclaimed their independence for the first time in over 2,500 years. And in a matter of days, the armies of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon attacked the tiny nation, but Israel survived because it was God's plan. Since then, much of the hostilities in the Middle East have been directed towards Israel. And as a result of the First War, approximately 700,000 Palestinians were expelled or fled from their land, which continues to be a problem for Israel today. Following the 1948 war, Egypt began blocking ships traveling to and from Israel. That led to wars in 1956 and 67, but Israel just gained more land from the Arabs. Yet they gave much of it back in efforts to make peace, which have resulted in treaties with Egypt and Jordan. However, Israel remains at odds with groups such as Hezbollah and Hamas. Hezbollah is a Shiite party in southern Lebanon, backed by Iran and Syria, and they want the Golan Heights back, but Israel refuses because it is too easy to launch rockets into northern Israel from there. Hamas is a Palestinian party currently ruling the Gaza Strip. They want their independence, but they refuse to recognize Israel's right to exist. They also want to return to the 1948 borders above, but Israel refuses because that would require them to return East Jerusalem. When Jordan controlled East Jerusalem, they blocked access to the Western Wall. And besides, Israel considers Jerusalem to be the eternal, undivided capital of the Jewish people. Then there's the oil factor. The tax collector reference is distinctive to the oil in Iraq because its value would have been unknown in previous verses. The royal splendor sounds typical of Great Britain, who primarily initialized the plan. It started slightly before World War I in 1912, and when the Turkish Petroleum Company was formed to seek concessions from the Ottomans to explore for Iraqi oil. And it was the mastermind of Calouste Gulbenkian, a naturalized British citizen born in Constantinople. In the original deal, TPC would be owned 50% by the British government, 30% by Royal Dutch Shell, which Gulbenkian owned a majority, and 20% going to the Ottomans. When World War I broke out, that arrangement was dissolved. In 1923, TPC resumed negotiations, but under the provisions of the British Mandate. Now, 4 countries besides Iraq wanted a share in the ownership of TPC. Iraq wanted the same 20% promised to the Ottomans, but 3 or 4 countries voted no. Iraq was afraid that the province in question, Mosul, would be annexed into Turkey without British support, so they conceded to demands in 1925. TPC was divided equally between Britain, France, Persia, and the U.S., with 5% going to Gulbenkian. It was renamed the Iraq Petroleum Company, but Iraq only got a small royalty on each ton extracted. After oil was struck in 1927, Iraqi oil money flowed into IPC pockets for 45 years. In return for completing 2 pipelines to the Mediterranean, IPC received more concessions to develop oil fields in southern Iraq. As time went by, they received larger areas on both sides of the Tigris River. The windfall started to crumble in 1958 when the Iraqi army overthrew the Hashemite monarchy and formed the Republic of Iraq. In 1961, President Abdul Qasim nationalized 99.5% of the concession areas, leaving only the producing oil fields in IPC's control. In 1972, the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party took control of the government and nationalized the rest of IPC's assets. The Iraqi government settled ensuing legal claims in the International Court, which got rid of the tax collector, but not in battle. See how it makes sense? I remind you, I did not write this. I'm reading from an article. Similarities and differences with Iranian oil. This is a recent article with more than one subject, but it gives some of the history behind the British and Iran. History sounds very similar to the Iraqi experience, except Iraq didn't try to nationalize the existing fields until much later than Iran, 1972 rather than 1951. The results in international courts were the same, and the U.S. now admits to their role in bringing down the Prime Minister and installing the Shah in 1953. It took about 26 years for the people to revolt in 1979, which leads into the next verse. And then it just gives quotes, and then it says, ironically, the Americans eventually took out the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, which nationalized the existing oil fields in 1972. Just took longer until 2003 because it was part of verse 22 in Daniel. And it shows that money and greed had a lot to do with the situation in the Middle East today. But a lot of it started with the discovery of oil and the tax collector. And that is... I'm going to read their summary to tell you what it says. In summary, I think it is obvious that Daniel 11 perfectly matches Middle Eastern history so far, for verses 2 through 20, which you'll find also within my series of the power of a name, because it coincides in relation to dates and histories with the dates with the names that I've been discussing for the lines of Adam and Shem. So, just explaining that. Although vague at times, God provided enough keywords to distinguish each empire from the others. When presented chronologically, it is unmistakable. And no one has discovered this before. Basically, they mentioned that when sealed until the time of end, as it mentions in Daniel 12:9, he's basically saying that we are now in the end times, because all of this is happening in today's history. And as we get into the discussion on Abram's name, Nahor, and Haran, that will all be in the same video because they are all born in 1948, and we'll rediscuss the other things related to Abram's name. We'll also end up going further into Daniel 11:21. We'll not do everything at the same time. What I'll probably do is discuss the power of the name with Abram and his brothers, and then making a separate video everything that has been happening in current world history, because from Daniel 21 on, it's all current world. It's all happening in today's time, and you can see it in the news everywhere. So those videos will be separate from the last video and the power of the name. Well, it may not be the last video, because I do plan on going and discussing other names within the Bible, but it'll be the last one as far as the genealogies connected to the names are discussed. So I realize that this video is more around the historical point, and it didn't have as much in it, but you were able to see the wanderers and the fury upon these people, how they were just massacring the people of the lands. But there wasn't much as far as this date in history was concerned other than these particular events. So the fact that these particular events were in direct correlation with the name, I don't think it's coincidence. I think that there's purpose behind it. But really, I'd say compared to other discussions, that there was less... I never really found anything technically for to breathe to represent the name Terah or to blow, except for that whenever it started to discuss the stew, how you use that imagery, how you normally have to breathe or blow upon the stew to pull it down. But that was more of an inferential suggestion. It, if I were to say that it was a direct connection like other videos that I've seen, I I cannot honestly tell you that with that particular connection. I can tell you that it is an opinion there. I do believe it is connected, but I can't tell you by fact that it is connected. Whereas in other videos, we were seeing all the numbers, all the names, all the definitions. There was no doubt that this particular year that we were discussing at that time, there was no doubt that it was connected to the name. No doubt whatsoever. I have no doubt that what happened in this year was connected to the name, because there's so much talking about refugees. And what are refugees? They're wanderers, they're loiterers, they're people who have fled from their home. They don't no longer have their own home. So it is directly connected, and it has all of these things in a way. Fury definitely, but as I said, many of my other videos have been more on point on every single word, and I prefer a lesson that kind of is really on point. Now with Daniel 11:20, that was definitely on point. You won't find another event in history that would be as close representing of the raiser of taxes as you would the British Mandate, and to not be defeated in battle or bloodshed, that kind of thing. They were defeated in court. Something, I'm sorry, something to think about. So thank you for watching this video, and I hope you were able to obtain what information you were looking for as far as this name is concerned. I hope to have you watching in the next video as well. Have a good day.